Let's Read Clips, which features daily 8 to 10 minute scary story videos with one story per video, getting you right into the action. You can find the links down in the description or pinned comment. And thank you all again so much. So this happened when I was 21. I'm currently 27. I'm a female, but back then, I believe I made a rookie mistake. But I have since learned my lesson and have taken precautions to ensure this doesn't happen again. I'm an avid mountain biker. Ever since I was about 13 to 14, I've loved riding on the trails. It's good exercise, but I mostly enjoy listening to music and just pedaling. I've never tried to time myself on a particular trail or anything. All I really did was keep track of my miles. I remember this one day in particular. It might sound a bit far-fetched, so I welcome skepticism with open arms. I'm just trying to get this off my chest, and I hopefully serve as a wake-up call for anyone who was as trusting as I was. I decided to go for a day ride at this one spot. I had been there before, but it wasn't one of my go-to trails, so I wasn't super familiar with it. I was familiar enough, though, to be comfortable going down the trails that I had done in the past. Upon arriving there, I was getting my pack ready when I met this girl who was doing the same thing. We started talking and hit it off quite well. At the time, she genuinely seemed like someone I could be friends with. She introduced me to her boyfriend, who was also a mountain biker, and once again, no red flags. They were both very friendly. They appeared to have a very healthy relationship as well. They both seemed to be around my age, give or take. They asked if I wanted to ride with them down their favorite trail, and I didn't see any harm in it. Besides, I wanted to learn the area better for potential future rides. The trail was one that I had never been on before. They were both faster riders than me, much faster in fact. I never backed down from a challenge. I kept up, although I was probably about 10 feet behind them the whole time. We stopped briefly for a water break, and I noticed that the girl had strategically left her backpack slightly open. It seemed harmless then, but it makes sense now. Without any warning, while I was taking a pee break in the trees, they suddenly started laughing and just took off. I was in a compromised position, so I hurried up and finished up to catch them. And by the time I got back to my bike, they were completely out of sight. Not to mention both of my tires had been slashed. I was stranded. I sat down for about 10 minutes to decide what to do. The sun was at its peak, and I remember feeling extremely lightheaded, although I'm pretty sure this was due to shock. I grabbed my bike and started walking down the trail. After about 15 minutes of walking, I came across a wire on the trail. It was tied between two smaller trees. If I had been riding, that could have easily slit my throat. However, the fact that they went through the trouble of slashing my tires made me question this. I hadn't seen them, so this may or may not have been them, or they could have potentially left it there to try and snare another rider. I honestly don't know, and I don't think about that part much anymore. The what-ifs make the whole thing more frustrating. Regardless, I used my Swiss Army knife to remove the wire. I wasn't going to go any further down the trail, so I pushed my bike in the opposite direction. Close to 6 miles later, I made it back to my car. There's a bike rental shop nearby that I stopped at and asked about the two. I gave them a description, but I couldn't provide enough details for them to be identified. They offered to call the police, but after the day I had, I just wanted to go home. I do regret this because over the years I've wondered if they did this to anyone else, and I did feel a level of guilt over this. I'd never been back to that trail. I'm still a mountain biker, but I no longer go alone. Fortunately, my husband is also a fellow mountain biker, so I always have a buddy. And please stay safe, everyone, and don't always trust a pretty face. To start off, I'd like to state that I'm a 20-year-old male who lives in the UK in a house with my family. My family consists of my dad, mom, sister, 2 stepsisters, one quite young and the other almost as old as me, and a young stepbrother. So there are a lot of people living in this house. and we also have a German Shepherd who is quite large and protective of the property. As well as that, this story needs some background to make sense. I currently live in a town in the UK that could be considered safe, but it has its fair share of dangerous people lurking around. I previously worked at a gas station where I've had numerous encounters with people trying to shoplift, many of them carrying knives and such. I hope this gives you a brief idea of what my neighborhood is like. Now that that's been said, this story happened only a few days ago. My cat had been missing for a few weeks, which wasn't normal for him, so I was evidently quite worried. I had been keeping my window open every night in case he came into our garden and started meowing like he usually does when he wants to come back into the house. I had spent the past few nights going out and looking for him, but finding and hearing nothing. This night was like any other. I was spending the night playing games and listening closely for anything coming from my window. At around 3 a.m. in the morning, I thought that I had heard something, so I bolted downstairs because I believed that what I was hearing was my cat. I thought of taking my dog with me in case I needed protection, but I realized that that would be a terrible idea since the cat is scared of the dog, so if the cat really was out there, he would just run away the second he saw the dog. I go outside with a flashlight in hand and started to hear weird noises. I couldn't put my finger on the noises at first, but when I listened closer, I realized that they were the sounds of scuffling around the back of the garden where we have a garage, a greenhouse, and a chicken coop. My first thought was there was some sort of animal trying to get at the chickens. This didn't worry me because we have a very aggressive rooster that can and will attack anyone that gets too close to the chickens. He has done so multiple times in the past. I started walking closer to the back of the garden, and the noises started to sound more human-like. It sounded like multiple people were running around. I was confused and stopped for a moment, standing there and listening. A gut feeling started brewing in my stomach, telling me to just go back inside, but I couldn't move. I didn't know if it was because of fear or me trying to come up with a reasonable explanation for the sounds. The more I listened, the more frequent the sounds got, as if something or someone was trying to lure me to them. I went back inside to grab the biggest knife I could and started scanning the garage with my dog, finding nothing. When I got back outside, I heard the chickens going crazy, which made me think that there was an animal attacking them. I walked to the chicken coop to check on them and make sure that they were okay, and they calmed down. As I exited the chicken coop, I soon realized that the sounds had all stopped. I stood still, searching for the sounds, trying to strain my ears. After what felt like hours standing there in the pitch dark with my flashlight, not daring to point it in the direction of where I heard the sounds previously, I snapped out of my daze and bolted back into the house. I made sure to lock the front door, and when I got to my room, I left my window open, and to my surprise, I heard whispering. Whispering coming from the garden, and then a sudden metallic bang. I thought I was imagining things, and this was all some sort of dream or hallucination. The next night, I went out again, calling my cat's name multiple times, but I got no response. And then I heard the snapping of branches coming from the direction where the greenhouse was located. I stood there, and I heard a person scraping or hitting something with a stick, followed by footsteps coming towards me. I hurried back into the house, and I heard my gate opening, so I locked the door just in case. Right after I closed the door, the handle slammed down, which scared the life out of me. I immediately thought that it was someone from my garden coming for me. I opened the door, ready to fight the person on the other side, and it turned out to be my sister coming back from walking the dog. I'd like to say thank you to her for scaring the soul out of me and putting me in full fight mode. She asked me why I was going around locking all the doors, and I explained to her everything that had happened over the past few nights, specifically what had happened the night before and that night. After I told her the story, she obviously didn't believe me and told me that it was all in my head. I told her that the sounds were there right now and asked her to come with me if she didn't believe me. We stood in the garden, listening, and on cue, the sound started back up again. My sister stopped dead in her tracks. I looked at her and said, "I told you so," but she shushed me. The sound of someone jogging or sprinting towards us came from the darkness. We both ran back into the house, and my sister reasonably demanded that we lock all the doors in the home. On the third night of looking for my cat, I was sitting in my room and decided not to go outside because of all that had previously happened. At 2 a.m., I decided to go outside and look for my cat once again. I put on my coat because that night I was determined to finally find my cat and put this all behind me, not caring how long it would take. I stood there in the open pitch black outside again, calling my cat's name, but I didn't get a response. I went to the front of the garden with my flashlight, looking and calling for him as well. After not getting any response, I sat myself down on the front steps of my house, flashing my light and still calling for my cat. An hour went by, and I got thoroughly bored just sitting there doing nothing. I started walking around the garden again, headed towards the greenhouse. I stopped myself, remembering what had happened the previous night. Thinking about it, I went and got the dog, both for protection and because, as stated before, the dog would bark if the cat was there. This would tell me if the cat was there or not. I know, genius thinking on my part, and the dog and I went towards the greenhouse area knowing that either my cat was there or there was some random person. I let the dog go and she did nothing. No barking, just silence. This gave me a feeling of relief that allowed me to walk after her, still scanning the area. And then I saw it. The discovery that chilled me to my bones. Someone had sunk a stick into the ground through a plastic bag. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why did a stick in the ground scare you? The reason being that it was sunk so deep into the ground, not even I, being pretty fit, could take it out of the ground. Someone had stabbed that stick into the ground with a scary amount of force. Making the situation worse, there was a pumpkin sitting right next to the stick knife, as I called it. But here's the thing. We don't grow pumpkins. We never have. But there it was, a pumpkin, sitting in our garden. It clicked in my head that there had either been one person or multiple people in the garden that night. The sounds that my sister and I had heard were people sharpening the sticks and messing about with them. They had been making noises around the property to lure someone out to investigate and do God knows what to them. In that moment, I was thankful to have had the common sense to run away when I did, because thinking about what these people could have done to me in the dark gives me chills, even as I write this. After this revelation, I checked behind the trees and such, making sure no one was there. Content with not finding anyone and making a note to myself to come back in the morning to get a clearer picture, I returned to my steps. I sat there, waiting for around an hour longer. Starting to get tired, bored, and hungry, I went back into the house. The acceptance of my cat being dead lurked into the back of my mind while I continued to mess about on my PC with my window open. And then, once again, I heard meowing. I rushed outside so quickly that I forgot to put on shoes, but I also had the presence of mind to grab a knife on my way out, deciding that if anyone was out there, I'd confront them on the spot. I reached my gate and saw my cat standing on the fence. I dropped my knife and my heart was filled with joy. I can't explain to you how happy I was to see him there. There had been no noises since that night, but I'm still wary when I go out at night. I thought about this experience and realized how lucky I was to not have gone further into the greenhouse that night. I could have been killed right there, or one of my younger siblings could have heard the noises and gone out themselves and they'd been killed. I try not to dwell on it too much because the thoughts truly disturb me. This happened about 5 years ago. First, a little background. My dad had trained me in how to keep calm in stressful or life-or-death situations, and I had done the same with my kids. My kids were 12 and 13 years old, sitting in the back seat. My elderly mom was right next to me, and we had just finished our errands, and I asked if anyone wanted to go to the popular small lake that has a one-way road going around it, about 1 mile in circumference, before going home. They all immediately wanted to do so, mostly to see the new duck chicks. There was a maximum speed of about 20 miles per hour and several places to exit if you didn't want to complete the full circle. The low speed limit was because many people were coming here for fishing or walking or jogging. We got to see the baby ducks and slowed to a stop at times to awe over the tiny chicks. I was halfway around when a huge man in a big truck went racing around the lake at about 50 miles per hour. There was a lot of screaming from people trying to get out of his way. I immediately started to speed up to take an exit off the road. I was almost there when I heard the truck's engine. My mom screamed and the kids were frozen in fear as I looked into the rearview mirror. He was coming up on us fast. He slammed on the brakes and came just inches from hitting the back of my car. Then he started following me aggressively, screaming all sorts of insults. I sped up and got out of there, but he kept following me. My mom was freaking out, and my kids were terrified, but doing the breathing exercises that I had taught them to stay calm. I yelled at my mom to be quiet. I threw my cell phone to my oldest son and told him to call 911, informed the dispatcher that we were headed to the police station, and asked them to have a few cops waiting for us. He did so, screaming in fear at times as the man went down a side street and then turned back to try and ram us off the road. He would get in front of me, slam on his brakes, park to block the road, or attempt a pit maneuver. I later thanked God that my dad had been in the military and had taught me many maneuvers to avoid aggressive drivers. I managed to avoid all the things he was doing. The dispatcher heard the terrified screams every time I had to brake hard or swerve the car. I was swearing like crazy. We made it to the police station where several cops were waiting for us. The guy was so angry that I don't think he realized where we were. He parked right behind me to block me in, got out of his truck still screaming, and came around to my side. He got even angrier when the cops wouldn't let him near me. He swung out and punched one of the cops so hard in the head that the officer was actually knocked out. He got tasered and sprayed as he was tackled down. It took several cops to hold him down when he suddenly went quiet. He suddenly realized where he was and began struggling again, saying that they couldn't arrest him because he didn't know that they were cops at that moment. I let out a relieved breath once he was in the back seat of a cop car. Paramedics came to check us all out. My mom had to be taken to the ER due to extremely high blood pressure and chest pains. My kids and I were also taken in. As soon as they realized that we were safe, the hysterical crying and clinging to me began. I was shaking and felt cold despite the warm temperatures, and I was told that I was in shock. After we all returned home, except for my mom, who had to stay overnight, the kids were too terrified to sleep in their beds and wanted to sleep with me. But we were all too wired to sleep, so I made some sleepy time tea and gave them melatonin. I, on the other hand, didn't take anything, and the comforting noises my home usually makes became scary. A few days later, I received a phone call from one of the arresting officers who told me that the man had several arrest warrants for similar things. He also told me that the guy had every intention of killing me and everyone else in my car simply because he was angry and wanted to vent it out. So it was a good thing that I called 911 and went to the police station. It would have taken me a few weeks before I could fall asleep easily again. I had to put my kids into counseling, and I still have nightmares from it, but they're really rare now. America Online was a big thing when I was 13, or in other words for my generation, AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002, and I would have been freshly 13 in 8th grade, and many times I went into chat rooms by myself or with friends just goofing around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were also a thing back then, but you could always avoid them by choosing the right chat room. I didn't have any photos of myself, and back then, you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera. Plus, I was 13 and self-conscious, which I'm sure many can relate to. But one day, a guy popped up on my screen wanting to chat. It went fine at first. I was very naive back then, and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. His name was Dave, and he said he lived in California. Eventually, he started telling me that he loved me, etc. However, the problem is that he claimed to be 19. Now, I wasn't proud of this, but initially being 13, I sent pictures of some random girl and claimed it was me, and he instantly fell for it, telling me age is just a number and how mature I was. At this point, he didn't live in-state, so there was never actually any chance of us meeting. Eventually, he told me he and his mom were moving to a city about an hour and a half away from me. He started begging me to see him, go to a movie, anything. I had to break the truth about the catfishing and say those weren't pictures of me but of someone else. And he was furious. He had been envisioning a different type of person this whole time. Dave forgave me a few days later, saying, "I still want to meet you because I love you for who you are." He used all the right words to get a young girl to swoon, and looking back, I realized how young and naive I was at 13. So I told my best friend everything I had explained above and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. We had a whole plan for him to drive to see me to go to the movies, all because I believed that this was normal. I didn't tell my mom, of course, and honestly, she hadn't noticed any of it happening to begin with. On the day my friend and I were supposed to meet up with Dave, her mom came and picked us up from school. She said something that made my stomach drop. She said, "Chrissy, you're not going to the movies. You're not meeting that man. You could get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you guys to just go." I remember crying because I genuinely thought that I could handle everything and be fine. She told me she wasn't going to tell my mom, but I had to promise to never speak to him again and never plan to meet a stranger online. He ended up showing up and was upset I wasn't there. He went on AIM and lost control, something I hadn't seen at that age. It scared me. It scared me to think how close I was to having him near me. I never talked to Dave again, but I easily believe that if my best friend's mom hadn't intervened, I could have been kidnapped or worse that day. My mom would have been none the wiser, and I was none the wiser. But I'm here today and have learned a very crucial lesson. When I was 14, I worked at a McDonald's that was connected to a gas station. It was a truck stop, so it was very busy 90% of the time. The only downside to working at a truck stop fast food place was that the bathroom was on the complete other side of the building. I was a freshman in high school, and at the time I was pretty small, maybe not in height, but in size. I was around 5'6" and anywhere between 130 to 150 pounds. Not super tiny, but small enough to where I might have been an easy target. This wasn't a fear of mine, however, but maybe it should have been. I remember I was in gym class. It was maybe the middle of the school day, and it was one of those days where we could just sit on the side and catch up on work for other classes if we didn't want to participate in the game. My friends and I did this almost all the time and almost never actually worked on anything important. We were laughing and joking around until I received Power School notifications on my school iPad excusing me from the remaining classes of the day. I was really confused because my mom hadn't mentioned anything about picking me up early, and I was only seeing my dad every other weekend, and he wasn't the type to pick me up from school. I was grounded, so I didn't have a phone with me other than a cheap flip phone my mom had gotten me from Walmart. I texted her about the notifications, but before I got a response back from her, my gym teacher told me that I needed to grab my things and go to the office because my mom would be picking me up. This confused me more, and I shot my mom another text asking if she was picking me up from school. She freaked out and told me not to leave the building. At this point, I was sitting in the office by the window waiting for apparently nobody to come pick me up until the situation was figured out. My mom ended up calling the school and letting them know that I wasn't allowed to leave with anyone that day. Apparently, whoever called claimed to be my mom and said that they were coming to pick me up. As far as I know, nobody ever showed up to pick me up, and I didn't hear anything else about it. My mom wasn't comfortable with me working at that truck stop, and we got my location switched to a McDonald's that was closer in town and wasn't connected to a gas station. What we think might have happened is someone saw my name tag and possibly called all the schools in the area until they found me, but I still have no idea how they would have known my last name. With that being said, creepy stranger who pretended to be my mom over the phone and tried to pull me out of school, better luck next time. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this and kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help me wake up. One night, I was up late on my phone with my dog laying in bed next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at his own reflection, and I told him to stop. But I then realized that he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand on. All I could see in the window was the reflection of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside, and turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window, and I swear, I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the left side of that window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it and pretended to just realize that it was empty. I turned on the lamp and acted like I was going to get water. I went to my parents' room and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way anything was out there. I went back to my room and told myself that I was just seeing things. I closed the blinds and turned off the lamp and got some sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window, and it was very visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and remember what my dad said about the floodlights. That worked pretty well, until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found that the bulbs had burned out. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know it's there. If there was someone at my window that night, thank God my dog saw it first. I just got back from shopping and was parking my car. I was just about to open my door when for some reason I had an off feeling. I looked to my left and I saw a woman with a hood standing a few feet away from me. When she saw me, she stopped walking towards me and backed up a few steps. I pretended to look through my purse, hoping that she would know that I had seen her and she would leave. She then went and hid behind my truck so I couldn't see her. My car doors were locked, but I didn't know what side she was on. I waited about 2 more minutes and then I had seen her run a few feet to the corner and hide beside a house. I kept looking back and kept seeing her peek her head out to see if I got out of the car. I called my dad and asked him if he can come to the car and help me walk home, and he came running down the street with a bat and the woman left running. Always be aware of your surroundings. If I didn't look to my left, I would have been potentially robbed or even worse. I now carry something with me in my hand anytime I'm getting out of my car. Always. I'm a 20-year-old female and I recently moved into a new apartment with my boyfriend who works away for long periods of time. An older man, maybe 50 years old, started to become pretty friendly with me, knowing that I was new to the complex. I made the mistake of telling him that I live with my partner, but he's away for work for a while. Almost every day after that, he came knocking on my door and waited if I didn't answer. He would leave after about 5 minutes of knocking and no response. Now, one time I was out in the common grass area playing with my brother, a 2-year-old little boy, whom I would occasionally have over from time to time and babysit. I saw him coming my way and quickly picked up my brother. The man started making conversation, asking about my brother, and literally tried to grab him out of my arms. I held on to my brother tightly, pulled away, and as he started to cry, I made an excuse that I have to go feed him, and I just walked away. And that was the last time I went near that man with my brother. I'm extremely bad with confrontation, as you can tell. A few days later, I heard a knock at my door, and I opened it without thinking. He was walking straight past me into my apartment without even saying a single word, just smiling. I asked him if he was doing okay, and he says, "I'm good, I just wanted to see what your place looked like from inside." And he started walking into every room, checked all my windows, and commented, so all your windows have bars on them except the bathroom. I nervously laughed and said, yeah, I guess they do. I didn't know what to do, so I walked out into the garden, hoping that he would follow me out of the apartment to try to talk to me. I just wanted him out, but was scared to anger him. I could tell that he didn't seem like he was right in the head. Once he came out the front, I closed my door and said, I gotta go to the shop now. Sorry, it's probably gonna close soon, and walked off. That night while hanging my washout, another neighbor introduced herself, this 34-year-old woman. I told her what had happened and asked if she knew the man. Apparently, he had been doing the exact same things to her. She told her partner, and that was his last straw. He ended up going and talking to the older man. After that, the older man only tried one more time that I know of to knock on my door, which I hid in my kitchen for about 10 minutes until he eventually left. I haven't heard anything since and haven't seen him around, but I wake up at night sometimes panicking, thinking that he's planning on doing something to me. My mom and I, a 9-year-old female, were shopping for bathing suits in a big department store, just the two of us. We were the only ones in the women's fitting rooms. I needed a suit in a different size, so my mom said that she would go look for it. I locked the door behind her and was just kind of vibing in there by myself. Not long after she left, I heard someone walk into the fitting rooms and stop. A man spoke. Hello? I didn't answer. Is someone in here? My 9-year-old take was that maybe the store was closing and this was just a male employee making sure that there was no one still in there before close. I wanted to pipe up so I didn't get locked in, but I couldn't answer. I suddenly had this horrible feeling of dread that was so overwhelming in the moment I couldn't actually move or speak. There was approximately 20 seconds of silence before he repeated the question, and approximately 20 more before I heard him leave the fitting rooms. My mom turned up not long after and we left. I didn't tell her about this until I was 21. I still think about this encounter after years of learning to trust my gut. I've only had that exact feeling a couple of times in my life since, and each time it was clear that my life was definitely in danger. Maybe it was nothing, but I still wonder about it and remember it putting me on edge, even as an adult. Recently, I've been getting more into cosplaying and attending conventions. I've been making all my own clothes for a while now, but I only recently decided to truly delve into cosplay. I've attended several conventions this year, and this is the first negative experience I've encountered. But anyway, for this particular convention, I wore my self-made Supergirl cosplay, which I designed and patterned myself. Overall, I was quite satisfied with how it turned out. Numerous people asked me for photos, and I generally agreed. However, later in the convention, my friends left, and since I was planning to meet up with other friends later that night, I took a break from wandering around and sat in a hallway with a small seating area. A person approached me and requested a photo. I agreed and stood up to pose. Out of nowhere, he stated, "Hey, thanks for being one of the few cosplayers who actually has the physique to pull off that cosplay." Now, taken aback, I asked, "Excuse me?" and decided I no longer wanted to take a picture with him. While he rambled and attempted to backtrack, I picked up my bag and began walking away. He then physically grabbed me and tried to prevent me from leaving. I pushed him away, firmly stating, "Do not touch me," and walked off. Despite his shouts behind me, I paid no attention to any of his words and simply telling him to not touch me again. And at that moment, I didn't have the opportunity to report him since my primary concern was just distancing myself from the situation. However, about 15 minutes later, on my way to meet the other friends I mentioned earlier, I spotted him again. Naturally, I immediately headed towards the nearest staff member to report him, and as I glanced over my shoulder, I noticed that he was giving me an unsettling, intense gaze, reminiscent of an edgy anime protagonist. I recounted the incident to a staff member while he advanced towards me, and by the time I finished explaining, he was standing just 5 feet away from me, attempting to justify himself by saying, "What I meant was that most cosplayers are overweight." I cut him off and walked away because my friends were waiting for me. Seriously, I knew exactly what you meant the first time, and that's precisely why I thought you were being disrespectful. His initial response was defensive rather than a sincere apology for grabbing me when I was trying to leave. Later that night, I followed up with con ops, and they informed me that they had spoken to him, placed him on a watch list, and mentioned, "I'm not excusing this behavior, but he explained that he is autistic and didn't intend any harm." I stated that harm was still inflicted, and he made me feel extremely unsafe. The con ops person assured me that they would work on banning him from the weekend, though not from the entire convention. I only attended the convention on Friday due to work commitments on Saturday and Sunday, so I'm unsure if any further incidents occurred after that. I thought a lot about sharing this experience, and I finally decided to share it with you here. When I was about 4, I went to the pharmacy with my mom. Now keep in mind that the area where the store was located was a middle-class, mostly peaceful neighborhood. So as my mother was buying what she needed, an old man entered the store. He was probably in his late 60s or early 70s. I remember that while I was waiting for my mom to finish shopping, I started doing some ballet moves. At the time, I took ballet classes. When the man saw me, he complimented my ballet moves and told me that he had a niece at home who also took ballet classes. I remember the man asking if I wanted to go with him to meet his niece and play with her. Being the naive child that I was, I said yes, and the man told me to follow him. As we almost reached the exit of the store, my mom called my name, and I went to her, leaving the old man behind. I didn't realize that it was a dangerous situation until I was much older. I asked my mom why she didn't react earlier when she saw the man talking with me, and my mom tells me that she was going to save me, but she wanted to see if I would follow the man. Now looking back on this, I realize how lucky I am for my mom and how vicious this incident could have turned out. Last week, I stayed at a youth hostel in the famous old town of Prague for 2 nights. The dormitory was a mixed room with 10 beds. One night at 4 a.m., I went to use the restroom. To my surprise, I saw a naked man standing in my dorm room, possibly with an erection. I tried my best to ignore him, pretending that I saw nothing, and returned to bed. However, in the following 10 minutes, I began to hear a distinct sound of someone vigorously rubbing wet flesh, which I assume was the sound of him touching himself. I made an effort to mentally block out this noise, trying to fall back asleep, and decided to report him to the reception first thing in the morning. After he finished, he went to the toilet to wash his hands and then moved to the bunk bed next to mine, which was odd as I remember a woman occupying it earlier that night. Approximately 30 minutes later, I noticed the people in the adjacent bunk had left their beds and were talking to the reception. I immediately woke up, assuming they had also witnessed this inappropriate behavior. To my shock, this individual had urinated on the bed of a young lady nearby. She had left her belongings and personal items on the bed, and she explained that her belongings were soaked due to his actions. I assumed the young lady was away drinking when this incident occurred. The receptionist informed us that unfortunately there was no CCTV cameras in the kitchen or room to capture the incident on video. I felt extremely disturbed by the situation and decided to check out immediately. I went to the bus station to catch my bus and find a place to sleep. For some reason, I felt calmer and safer sleeping at the bus station than in that unsettling room. I sincerely hope that both the other guests and the receptionist reported this incident to the police and that the perpetrator was apprehended. If you happen to be one of the guests and are reading this, I would appreciate an update on the situation. I am an older woman, and back when I was young, things were different. You could hitchhike with creepy guys in vans. We just called them hippies. But it was also a time when serial killers roamed free. I grew up on a farm in South Carolina, no paved roads and not a lot of communication from the outside world. My best friend and I decided to walk to the only store and post office/gas station for some candy. It was highly unusual because we never had any money. As we were walking, our car came driving by really, really slowly. We didn't think anything of it because the roads were not the best. We were not the most worldly kids, and no one ever told us about stranger danger. We knew everyone and talked to anyone who said hi. Well, this car passed, and then we saw it turn around. We didn't think much about it, but then it came up to us and stopped. I might not have known what danger from a stranger was, but I had this horrible nauseous feeling when I looked in the car, like when you see an animal predator and don't know what you should do. All I knew was that I had the feeling of let's run. My friend must not have gotten that feeling because she went right up to the car. The man was greasy and dirty, but we were used to seeing people like that out working. He asked us if we wanted a ride, and she said sure, and I said, "Nah, we need to walk." She looked so mad at me like I had ruined her day, so she said that she was going to go on a walk with me. I could see his hand move as if though he was going to open the door, and I suddenly got that feeling of dread. Everything started to go in slow motion, so I grabbed my friend's arm and pulled her back. Just then, another car was coming from the opposite way, and he drove off pretty quick. She was so mad at me for hurting her arm, and I did leave a couple of bruises. Now, a few years later, she came over and looked like she was going to pass out. She had a newspaper in her hand and couldn't say anything, so I looked at it, and it was the same man who had tried to get us into his car. His name was Pee Wee Gaskins. Now here's the link to the show of what a vile, disgusting human he was, and y'all please don't be afraid to hurt someone's feelings. I was literally taught to obey every adult, but if I had, we wouldn't be here today. Arm yourself. It doesn't matter if it's a firearm, taser, pepper spray, or knife. People are not nice. Mental illness is out of control and criminals outnumber us. So always be aware, and always follow your gut. This is something I've never really told anyone about, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, so here it is. A few years back, 2015 to 2016, when I was about 18 to 19, I used to work at this little cafe inside a car parts factory. It was essentially a fully equipped yet compact restaurant kitchen and lunchroom for the workers to eat. Well, one day I received a call from my best friend and coworker. She was quite upset because of a creepy new temp worker who made her feel extremely uncomfortable by asking her a bunch of personal questions. These questions included details about what she drove, where she lived, her relationship status, if she had any children, and when she finished work, among others. Given that she was my age, 18 to 19, and this guy was in his mid to late 30s, possibly even in his early 40s, and we were in Flint, Michigan, we weren't willing to take any risks. I drove up to the parking lot and found her car, parked next to it, and had a security guard accompany her out. We didn't spot the guy then, but she described him to me and the guard, and that was the end of it for a few days. Someone informed him to stay away from her, and he complied. However, then he encountered me. I recognized him immediately as soon as he approached the register to place his lunch order. This was from the description my friend had given me and the unsettling vibe that he was emitting. He subjected me to the same intense Q&A that he had subjected my friend to. However, instead of telling him off, calling security, or taking any similar action, I decided to tell him a series of outright lies. I informed him that I drove a blue 2012 Honda Civic, which I knew for a fact belonged to one of the second shift managers. This manager typically parked near the front of the building, so I knew the car would be there until the second shift ended at 11 p.m. I also told him that my shift ended at around 9:30, which was actually when I usually slipped out for a cigarette break. When 9:30 arrived later that night, I stepped outside to smoke my cigarette. Just as I anticipated, there was that creepy guy in the parking lot, close to the area where the Honda Civic was parked. He was pacing back and forth behind two vehicles parked a few spaces down in the same row, engrossed in his phone the whole time. At one point, he glanced up and saw me staring at him. However, with my substantial leather winter coat and a hat on, I wasn't sure if he recognized me from a distance at first. I finished my smoke and returned inside to explain the entire situation to the security guards. One of them was the same guard who had escorted my friend to her car a couple of days earlier. They found it incredibly amusing that I had managed to deceive the guy and catch him behaving suspiciously. I'm not entirely sure what they did after that because I went back to work, but I do know that they immediately confronted him in the parking lot and he was fired that very week. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions were. However, it doesn't take a genius to deduce that they couldn't have been anything positive. Ultimately, the moral of the story is always have your friends' backs and trust your instincts. If you don't, you could end up trapped in a parking lot and potentially targeted or abducted by some creepy individual who asked too many questions. And since I didn't include this originally, after my friend and I were informed that the guy was fired, we were given his full name. My friend paid to conduct a background check on him, which revealed a history of violent criminal activity, including domestic abuse, assault and battery with a weapon, jail time for violating a PPO, and parole violations, among other things. I hope this clarifies that we weren't just getting creepy vibes. When I was younger, around 20, I'm now 32, I worked in an assisted living home in rural Minnesota. I enjoyed the job and found fulfillment in helping the elderly. Once I realized how much I enjoyed the job, I had plans to further my career in nursing. During my time at this assisted living facility, I worked night shift as they aligned well with my college schedule. I was the only younger person on the night shift, working alongside individuals in their mid-30s and older. I've learned a lot from these colleagues, heard unsettling stories of their experiences, and made a few friends whom I still keep in touch with today. One night while working there, I was assigned to the third floor where there were about 15 residents at the time. I had gotten to know all of them and had become particularly close to a few. One lady, whom we'll refer to as Judy, not her real name, was my absolute favorite. We would spend hours talking whenever she was awake at night, unable to fall asleep. Judy was in her 80s and in good shape. On this particular night, Judy called me to her room to help her fix her TV. After tightening the cables on the back of her TV, we sat and talked for a good 20 minutes. She shared her plan to walk to the nearby park in the morning, something she did every day. Her routine involved walking to the park with a bag of bread, sitting on the benches next to the water and feeding the geese. After a while of conversing, I informed her that I needed to continue my rounds and that I would see her the following night. We exchanged goodbyes, and as I was leaving her room, she said, "Alicia, you're a good kid." And I smiled and proceeded to carry on my rounds. A few hours later, at around 4:30 a.m., my coworkers and I decided to go outside for a smoke break. We sat in the cold 40-degree weather, smoking and chatting, and while outside, we noticed an older lady walking down the sidewalk away from the building. She looked familiar, and I recognized her when I saw the bag of bread that she was carrying. "That's a little early for Judy, isn't it?" my coworker remarked. I suppose so," I replied, and we shared a laugh and continued smoking. Suddenly, our pagers buzzed all at once, and we rushed back inside. The coworker who paged us had a noticeably sad expression. They hugged me for about 30 seconds, during which time I felt a sense of confusion. This coworker was familiar with my family, so I worried that something might have happened to them. Perplexed as ever, I followed them to the elevator and up to the third floor. My heart sank as they led me to Judy's room. I could hear sirens in the background, and I immediately realized that the news wouldn't be good. To my shock, there lay Judy, lifeless in her bed. My coworker and I had exchanged incredulous glances, and I experienced a mix of sadness and just bewilderment. Hadn't we just seen Judy walking in the direction of the park she frequented? I knew I wasn't imagining things, as my coworkers had seen her too. We never discussed it again, as unsettling as it was. We simply came to the conclusion that Judy was doing what she loved on the night that she passed, walking to the park to feed the geese. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sunday, Tuesdays, and Thursday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/LetsReadOfficial, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. If you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts and releases every Tuesday at noon. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, I'm SpongeBob.